Hi, welcome back to Zmarie Design. Today we're going to talk about fabric scraps. We always have scraps left over from projects. We never know what to do with them. Here are 3 ways to store your scraps and 3 ways to use your scraps. Hi everybody, welcome back to Zmarie Design. Today I'm going to show you a unique way of storing your scraps. So one of the ways I do things, once you've finished your project and you have bits of pieces of fabric left over, some are a bit larger than others and some are a little smaller. One of the things that I do to store my scraps, I cut them in squares, 3.5-inch squares, 4.5-inch squares, and 6.5-inch squares. It could be any number, any size square that you want. That's just the number that I chose. So the first thing I do is make a straight edge on my fabric. So I line it up with my cutting mat, line up my ruler, make sure that it's all squared up, and make sure that the shortest edge, of course, covers your line. Square up my fabric, make sure that that's on the fold of the fabric on each of the lines of my cutting mat, and I cut, get a straight edge. That's the first thing I do. So I have that on this one. So now once this piece, it's a little smaller, so I will check the size. This I think would be great for the 3.5-inch size. So I measure it up and I cut 3.5-inch squares. So all of this will be cut at 3.5-inch squares, and that's how I store all of my scraps. So now when you have a larger piece of fabric, one of the things that you do, I try to start, if I have a larger piece of a scrap, once I'm all done using it for the project, start with the largest, which is 6.5-inch, because it's easier to cut down a 6.5-inch to a 4.5 or a 3.5 if you need it. So I've already squared up the line, match my ruler, make sure everything matches, cut 6.5-inch, and then I can just turn it and continue to cut these strips at 6.5-inch squares. So there you go. Then it's easier for you to use and to when you need to make a project. I will show you some of the projects that I have made from my 3.5, my 4.5, and my 6.5-inch squares. And have fun storing your scraps. So after I've cut all of my fabric scraps into the size squares that I prefer, I store them in these plastic bins that I just got from the dollar store. These are my 4.5-inch size. I try to sort them by colors so you can see the blues, the greens, orange and yellows, reds and blacks. And then I'm able to grab the color that I need when I'm ready for a project. So I store them in baskets, the 4.5-inch size, the 3.5-inch size, and then the 6.5-inch size. They all go into bins, and it's just so much easier for me to grab what I need when I'm ready to create a project. Using fabric scraps, I created this cosmetic bag. I used the 4.5-inch squares to create the lining of the bag, making a 6-inch patch, and the bag is complete. This boho sling bag was created using the 6.5-inch fabric scrap squares, as well as the lining was also created using the 6.5-inch fabric squares. These designs were created using the 3.5-inch fabric scrap squares, also with some sashiko stitching for added detail. If you like to save smaller pieces of fabric scraps, this idea uses foundation fabric to piece and create additional yardage that I then cut a variety of shapes that I use for additional applique details. So save your fabric scraps for additional creating.